Hi, thanks for watching Naked Media. I'm Dorian Bencoil, and we are here, Naked Media, on the road. It's our first time truly on the road, although we've gone from other locations once in a while. But this is part of our new partnership with the IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, which is the major trade organization for interactive advertising. And I'm thrilled today to have as our first guest Randall Rothenberg, the CEO and president of the IAB, and we'll talk about some of the essays he's written and what he thinks are some of the really important flashpoints and conflicts and issues in the industry. And then after Randall, we'll show a little bit of video from a trade show that we've seen and that we've done. We cover trade shows, and we're going to have guests, Dina Kaplan, the COO and co-founder of Blip TV, and Steve Rosenbaum, who is the CEO and founder of Magnified.net, and they'll talk to us about the web video they're doing, how they're making money, whether it's a threat to broadcast TV, and other kinds of interesting topics, including your questions. I'm thrilled, like I said, to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thrilled with our new partnership.
Great, me too. Us too.
You are, of course, a former New York Times reporter in addition to many other things, and so you know how to write. And you've written some more or less book-length...
My editors, my former editors, would challenge that claim.
Okay, well, without the benefit of your former editors, you've written a couple of really strong essays, which are, for the internet, practically book-length, about some real sort of flashpoints in media, and I wanted to talk about them. And you've got a new campaign about privacy, and I want to talk about that. But first, I want to address sort of the where you think there are some real conflicts and tensions. And one of the things, one of your essays, and I don't know if we're able to show that the essay on creativity. But one of the issues that you bring up is this sort of tension between creativity and measurability, or creativity and sort of a direct response mentality. And you think that the advertising of old was highly, very old was more or less direct response.
Well, the origins of the industry, yeah, a large portion of that was in what we'd think of today as direct response. It was the Sears catalog, for example, and other kinds of shop by mail efforts. But early advertising was also about brand advertising. You got to remember that advertising, as we know of it and love it and think about it today, really has its origins around kind of three concurrent historical events. One was the development of mass manufacturing, the creation of mass products to replace or supplant kind of craft products. A second was urbanization and the rise of the department store. And then the third was the creation of mass media. First newspapers, but then magazines and some other things. And so, basically the beginning of brand advertising is the effort by companies like Heinz in Pittsburgh to get grocers to stock their canned and jarred products on shelves and persuade consumers, buyers, to ask for them rather than just taking generic pickles literally out of a pickle barrel. Okay, so that's a historical perspective. I mean, and I don't want to spend all the time talking about sort of the history. I'm sure that we could. One of the points you make is that there was kind of what's perceived as a heyday of advertising that maybe lasted decades, where creatives and creativity and creative people led the industry. Yeah. Now we're in an era, at least in the interactive side, which is of course the only side that's ballooning and growing by leaps and bounds, where the creative arguably takes a subservient position. Well, let's actually, it's very important to actually look at what's going on in terms of economics and processes. I think much as we in the industry would like to deny it or ignore it, we really invented this industry to be a direct response industry. We didn't necessarily look carefully at the distinctions between brand advertising and direct response advertising. We were building these businesses. Our financial bases were small. We're just looking to build growth on those small financial bases. And direct response advertising and marketing was the low-hanging fruit that was available, so we grabbed at it. It's not until very, very recently, and I would really say probably within the past 2 or 3 years, that brand advertisers institutionally at very high levels are really beginning to look at this medium for brand advertising. So I wouldn't kind of, I just kind of want to make the distinction clear that so much of the advertising that really runs for direct response purposes. There is nothing wrong with that. Below the line advertising, and I'm assuming that most of the folks who are listening or will be watching this later on tape know the difference between above the line and below the line.
Well, just in a sentence, above the line is sort of standard advertising and stuff that people buy ads and commercials for, and below the line is
it's what we would call the main media or measured media. There used to be kind of 7 main or measured media, television and it's kind of spot, national broadcast and cable and radio and billboards and magazines and newspapers. And below the line stands for consumer promotions, trade promotions, public relations, direct marketing in particular, although there are other aspects of it. The point that I was getting at is if you look at the totality of marketing spend in the United States, below the line counts for a lot more than above the line. It's about 70% of total spend is below the line, and about 30% or so, maybe even 25% is above the line. That said, what people are really focused on and the questions that get asked by so many digital publishing companies and agencies and marketers has to do with brand advertising. But you can't really talk about it until you start making the distinction between direct response, primarily direct response, and below the line more broadly, but the distinction between direct response and brand advertising and their purposes, what they aim to do, what their objectives are, and the processes underlying them and how they're measured. Those are very, very, very different beasts.
See, but I think that what's happening is that the digital media, the interactive media, if you want to call it that, is busting down those barriers.
I actually think that...
Can I make my point?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to hear you refute it, but let me make my point. Because what we're having is we can have brand advertising, but with a new level of measurability. So it may not be direct response, but there's a measurability component to even... We don't have the loop closed.
It's a false dichotomy, and with all due respect, a not educated dichotomy. The deal is, if you look at the IAB Bain study, Building Brands Online, we just released it 2 weeks ago. There's, it's entirely, every page of it is striking, but there's one page that has leapt out at me and really lived with me since I first saw it. And the consultants from Bain, a major part of the study was a survey of 700 senior marketers, brand marketers. These are all brand marketers. They're not B2B. And there's one page that's headlined metrics, metrics everywhere, but not the measurements that brand marketers want. And it showed very, very clearly that overwhelmingly brand marketers are looking at 4 objectives. The 4 objectives that they want to measure against are awareness, favorability, intent to purchase, and likelihood to recommend. At the whole other end of the spectrum, they found that overwhelmingly what we, digital publishing companies and the agencies we work with, what we offer an entirely different set of metrics that we kind of implicitly say are better. And there are things like click-through, PDF downloads, in other words, direct response metrics. Right. Now, why is that different? We could argue that, on the one hand, that clicks are a better measure than panel-based intent to purchase or panel-based awareness measures. So why would we substitute something that is vague and hazy over here for something that's very hard and accountable over here? Well, the answer is, remember what the purpose of a brand is. Brand actually only has one purpose in life, or one definition. Brand is that collection of assets and capabilities that allow you the ability to realize premium pricing against like competitors in your category through time. In other words, it's Dorian's soap and it's Randy's soap. And what I want to do in building my brand is I want to get people to pay more for Randy soap today, tomorrow, next month, next year than they're willing to pay for Dorian soap. That's very different from the objectives of direct response. Direct response lives for one reason: to get today's sale at today's offering price through today's control mechanism. It has no concern for the future, no concern for long-term pricing realization. It's not what it exists for.
Okay, but
so the two different kinds of accountability aim at two very different kinds of objectives.
But even with brand advertising, there are new kinds of measurability. I mean, at the very least, exposure. If I put an ad in Newsweek magazine, or any magazine, or any TV show, you couldn't really prove to me that somebody saw that ad.
You can't actually fully do that online either.
Of course not. I mean, yes, a page can load and somebody can go away from the computer.
Same thing.
But it's more provable. It's more toward measurability.
Well, I would say that, I would rephrase it. I would say that there are more measurement systems and structures. Whether they're the right measurement systems and structures for the objective you're trying to reach is a very, very different story. And that's where I think people have gotten gummed up. Again, if you look at the distinction I was making before between, say, click-throughs and intent to purchase, those are two very different objectives. There are very different sets of measurements that you would apply to each of those objectives. The two have nothing to do with each other. It's entirely possible that we're coming into the world through technology with new kinds of metrics that can measure those objectives, but all that's doing is adding to what already exists against those categories. And I really would very strongly argue that don't confuse objectives, and don't confuse the metrics that go against those objectives, and B, that confusion is one of the sources of trouble in the industry. I mean, I'll make another point, which is intentionally provocative, and I have to preface it by saying I love direct response marketing. I actually do love it. I mean, I think it's a fabulous business, and is also a wonderful business subculture. So what I'm about to say is, and also they pay a lot of money to interactive publishers. So this is not a diss on direct response. But what has gone on, what has taken place in the online brand marketing world is the rough equivalent of being colonized by an alien civilization. So brand marketing online has been colonized by direct marketing aliens. They kind of look like us. They kind of talk like us. They're very familiar seeming, but they eat us for a living. And the mistake that we've made in this business is confusing and conflating the two, which has had a pretty significant impact on things like pricing schemes, how we measure the cacophony of confusion in the marketplace. And I think one of the places we need to begin to repair this is by making very clear that brand marketing and direct response marketing, or brand marketing and consumer promotions for that matter, are utterly different from each other. Different objectives, different means of achieving those objectives, different ways of measuring whether we've achieved those objectives.
Okay, so if I'm at, another one of your essays we're going to talk about, you talked about Martin Sorrell. So if I'm at one of the WPP agencies, at J. Walter Thompson or Ogilvy or whatever, and I'm sitting there with brand company X, what do I say to them we've got people watching who are actually in this position, and maybe they're director level or VP level at an agency, and they're sitting across the table they're at Ogilvy Interactive or whatever Ogilvy is calling their interactive arm right now, and they've got somebody from Colgate or Unilever or whoever sitting across the table. So what do they say to them to say, no, don't worry about the measure. We'll help you build your brand and trust us because we're going to play.
No. That's not what you say. It's exactly the opposite of what you say. What you need to do is you need to go in and say, look, if your objective is selling this tube of toothpaste at this offering price today, yes, here are the measurement systems that you can use, and we can use things like clicks as a proxy, but more likely we're actually just going to use sales as a very specific measure. But if your goal is to be able to assure that this tube of toothpaste will be able to successfully sell for 25% more than its competitors next month, next year and 5 years from now, the definition of a brand, then here are the metrics you need to apply, and here are the ways we need to go about seeing that we've achieved these goals. I mean, really.
And those metrics are?
Well, among other things, whether you're successfully selling at the premium price. That would be the first measurement that you would use. So since most packaged goods marketers are now engaged in variations of everyday low pricing, you've got to be, and also still being forced by the trade, by the retail trade, into various forms of discounting, both to the trade and then to the consumers. You've got to be able to look clinically at how your advertising maps against your premiumization capability in different marketplaces. So it begins there. This isn't about click-throughs or panels. Those are just kind of means to an end. The first place you've got to look is, am I being successful in competing at these price points with my competitors in my field?
But is that, I mean, okay, so bringing it back to the agency discussion with the brand, is that
Right.
even a realistic, is it even realistic to think that the conversation at that level will address the, because what you're talking about is C-suite level, where they're doing the entire brand strategy and pricing mechanisms and all.
No. This is what brand management is. Brand management has been about this for decades and decades. Now, yes, it's true that the brand management system at major consumer packaged goods manufacturers has had to catch up with the realities of the internet, and there's been an enormous amount of confusion there. I understand that, but it is catching up. I mean, marketers are not idiots. It's like David Ogilvy. Just to paraphrase him, the customer is not an idiot. The consumer is not an idiot. Choose your wife. Well, the customer is not an idiot. She's your client. So these conversations happen all the time. I think where there's a lack of sophistication, unfortunately, is in many media companies, especially new media companies that are digital native, where folks don't come from long histories and long backgrounds in brand management. They don't come from very long backgrounds in sales generally. A lot of the leadership of our companies and our member companies is technology-based, unsurprisingly and thankfully, but there needs to be more sophistication in our industry broadly about what marketers and agencies do for a living. And when you get that sophistication, you discover, yeah, these conversations take place all the time. Another challenge we have, however, just to absolve our members of responsibility, is up until very recently, these conversations were taking place at a fairly low level. I mean, it's sales people at publishing organizations interacting with relatively junior planners at media agencies. So there are a lot of disconnects that allowed this confusion between direct response and brand to proliferate.
And I've had conversations with planners who did seem somewhat inexperienced and asked for contradictory things and basically tried to hammer me on price and frequency and stuff like that, and didn't even necessarily seem to understand the brand argument. Let me address.
It's a real challenge, but also we need to kind of remember, this is not to put a good face on it, quite the opposite. That it has been a challenge in the agency business for decades. I mean, I remember back, one of the first really prominent stories on the industry that I wrote for the New York Times, and I think this goes back to 1988.
So you were using a chisel and hammer?
Yeah, basically. It was kind of like cold type and hot lead, and it was a prominent story on the power of 24-year-old media planners over the magazine business. So this has been a common refrain, the lack of experience and the lack of analytical ability of the media planners at agencies who dominate the development of media plans. So yeah, we are experiencing in interactive, probably in a more profound way, what the magazine industry and the television industry have been experiencing for a couple decades.
Well, one of the points you try to make too is that if somebody does have the direct response mentality, they may end up actually damaging their brand over time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, any serious marketer, any marketer who's been in business for even a short period of time knows that going way, way back in history, there's been a distinction between marketing and sales. And by the way, in most companies, there's always a tension between marketing and sales too. In the automotive industry, we've known this, for years and years and years. Marketing marketing's goal, the marketing department's goal, is to make sure you could charge premium prices for that BMW and get those premium prices. Sales's goal is to help those dealers move that metal off the lot today. There's always a tension between those two things, and it doesn't matter whether it's a BMW or whether it's Crest toothpaste. You're facing that tension between marketing to drive premiumization and sales to help the distributor, help the retailer move the stuff.
Okay, one more question on creativity. It's interesting you mentioned BMW, because one of the things in your essay you said, name me 4 interactive ads that were highly creative that you think, and you said, okay, subservient chicken, fine, but that was 5 years ago. Okay, so I've got another example from 5 years ago, but I've got a couple of more recent examples, and I'd like to hear what you think about them as creative. BMWfilms.com.
Yeah,
that's an old one. But it, well, you know, I think it was highly creative. I don't know if you're aware of the Reebok.
But remember, I said the challenge is a different bar. You didn't read the whole challenge. It said name highly creative, you know, very effective, culturally significant, and I don't remember the phrase I used, but move the needle as well.
All right. Well, Blendtec.
I've never seen or heard of Blendtec.
Will It Blend?
Oh, the Will It Blend.
Will It Blend is the blenders that just for those of you who haven't seen it, it's basically what some have said is a brilliant viral video campaign where they take stuff, anything from a broom to an iPhone to any kind of hard object, put it in this high-priced blender. The thing spins around, chops it up into a little piece of wood or metal or whatever. And apparently Blendtec sales have gone through the roof because they have essentially shown in viral video fashion that their blenders do in fact perform better than your average off-the-shelf, you know, store-bought.
I can't comment because I haven't seen it.
Dell's Twitter feed. Now, you know, there's basically one person saying, we got these great new monitors at, you know, Jim Jones, you asked for purple, we've got purple now. And apparently at the cost of whatever, you know, one person spending part of her time doing this, they're selling millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's a direct response campaign. It's a very effective direct response. Remember, Dell is overwhelmingly a direct response marketer, not a brand marketer. But much more interesting to look at, say, well, obviously Apple, which in that field of consumer computing is the premium brand. Or HP, which actually sits in the middle. I mean, does a lot of direct response, does a lot of brand, and is actually trying to establish price points that are higher than Dell's, lower than Apple's in the field. And I think, you know, in those cases, more than Dell, you see a very, very interesting. In Apple's case, you see almost complete reliance on brand advertising that is not focused on direct response metrics, is focused on those longer-term premiumization-related creative approaches and measurements. And in HP's, you're seeing both. Remember, HP won the IAB Mix Award, Gold Award for Best in Show 2 years ago for its creative campaign. I mean, the one that was just about all the colors of the rainbow, and they were really aiming at, and successfully aiming at, using online for big brand awareness and favorability. Again, aimed at with the goal of, you know, reinforcing their price points that are above Dell's.
Okay, we've got just a few more minutes left. I wanted to quickly ask. I wanted to let you talk about the new privacy campaign. I would also suggest, we've gone into a lot of the issues about whether marketing is a strategic resource or procured community, so we don't have to go in. What did I say?
Community.
Sorry, procured commodity. So that's a wonderful essay at your blog IAB or AB, which is randallrothenberg.com.
Yes.
Folks can read that. Tell me a little bit, Peter. Do we have the image of the creative for their Privacy Matters campaign? The advertising is creepy. So we'll show a quick image of that. And so I'm sure a lot of you are aware, but for those of you who aren't, Congressman Rick Boucher is leading a bill, or at least something that could become a bill, to try to essentially, the most draconian version of which would force people to opt in for cookies rather than now, which is essentially opt out. And the implications of that would be huge, of course, because it would mean that people, instead of just sort of seeing advertising would have to say, yes, I want to see advertising with this kind of measurability. So you've got this campaign to combat that, or...
Well, I mean, the campaign, is what we call the Privacy Matters campaign, is intentionally provocative, too. Really is part of a...
Is advertising creepy?
That's one of the headlines, advertising is creepy, and then it goes on to say, well, of course not, it's not creepy, you can't see these things about you. Cookies don't know who you are, they don't contain your address, and then what we do is when people get to that message, we offer them a click-through to an IAB website called Privacy Matters, which actually gives all manner of information about how the medium works, what it does know, what it doesn't know, and how you can use the tools that are already there to protect your privacy up to the full degree that you want to protect it. The campaign derived really from an absolute necessity in the industry, and something where the industry also absolutely lagged behind for years, which is really talking to our consumers, talking to the men and women of the United States about how we work, how and why we do what we do. And I'd say it's something that the industry needs to take some responsibility for not having done really for the past 10 years. I mean, the first real privacy debate in this industry was in 1999 around DoubleClick and its intent to acquire an offline company called Abacus. And after that flurry of concern and interest, industry made a couple good moves around self-regulation, like the creation of the network advertising initiative. But it never took the next step, which is to engage in a continual conversation with the consumers, the people themselves, about how things work. And this is now an attempt by IAB to just get out front, get out center, and tell people how the industry works and how to protect their own privacy.
So some have said this is kind of a rearguard action, and I would ask another way and say, is it possible that maybe it's too late, that by just doing this stuff without explaining it, and now Rick Boucher, because it sounds...
Well, keep in mind, Congressman Boucher is not the issue here.
So
the issue, there are a couple issues. The general issue is consumer concern inflamed by advocacy groups whose intent is to get regulation of the internet and both commercial speech on the internet and commercially supported speech on the internet. That is the issue. In proximate terms, the real issue is the FTC. And the FTC has asked us to create a robust self-regulatory mechanism to assure consumer privacy rights and expectations are met. This is not the prospect of congressional legislation. This is the reality of what the Federal Trade Commission has asked us to do. Now, industry is engaged in an unprecedented, and I can say that honest to God literally, an unprecedented level of collaboration. For the past 2 years, the Association of National Advertisers, the American Association of Advertising Agencies, the IAB, and the Direct Marketing Association have been working with the Better Business Bureau to create a set of robust self-regulatory principles, which we released in July, and we now have raised money, and the Better Business Bureau is in the process of building that cross-industry self-regulatory mechanism. The FTC has publicly credited this. Chairman Leibowitz, Commissioner Pamela Jones-Harbor, the now gone head of Consumer Protection, Eileen Harrington, have all publicly credited what industry is doing here around self-regulation. So that's the important thing. The important thing to remember is that industry is self-regulating. The second important thing is FTC also said that one of the things that they are most interested in about our principles is our commitment to educate the public. So that's what this is about. This is much more important than any legislation that Congressman Boucher might introduce, because what the FTC is asking is right now. What Congressman Boucher is talking about is in the future.
All right. So again, if I'm sitting there and I'm an ad exec or an either at an advertising agency, I can everything's fine. I can relax. You guys are handling it, no problem.
No, you got to be really attentive to this stuff. I mean, you don't do anything that you think would creep out your mother. Just don't do it. I mean, it's kind of obvious.
Well, sometimes I feel like my mother would be creeped out if she knew about behavioral advertising that happens to her on her AOL account. I mean,
well, but you see, that's where the pro-regulation groups have kind of leapt in here, because what they're looking to do is to use that
my mother
phrase.
Actually, in fact, my mother was in fact creeped out by an ad in an email account. I don't remember which email made Gmail or Yahoo, but I mean, she actually was creeped out in an ad that appeared that was, contextualized, so the ad looked like it had read the message. And so the ad looked like the content.
Well, it's machine driven.
Right, I know it's machine driven. It's probably not explained all that to her, but she was creeped out.
Right. So you've got to be. I mean, it's kind of that lack of sensitivity, which really it begins with the agencies, right? It begins with the agency and the client deciding to do an ad and to use these techniques to get the ad in front of relevant audiences. So clearly, the individual copywriter and art director and producer, and clearly the media company, the publisher that may be partnering on this, that's where the responsibility begins. And the marketer too. They've got to understand that people have sensitivities and they should not be trammeled upon. By the same token, though, it is crazy and very destructive to say that because your mother got creeped out by a machine-driven advertising distribution mechanism that didn't compromise anything that we would consider her privacy. It's crazy to say because of that, we should create legislation that would ban cookies, which is what's actually in the hopper in the EU right now, or that would ban the opportunity to use third parties to deliver ads. Because the proposals that we're seeing from the pro-regulation groups and the proposals we're seeing even in state legislatures like New York would actually do that and would impinge. I mean, at the FTC hearings the other day, we introduced, actually Omar Tawakol from Blue Kai showed some Group M data that said under the FTC's definition.
I'm sorry, Blue Kai is blue?
Blue Kai, B-L-U-E-K-A-I.
Okay.
And so he used some Group M data that says that under the FTC's definition of behavioral advertising, 70% or more of all online ads would be covered. And we're talking about the plain vanilla distribution of plain vanilla display advertising would fall under a regulatory umbrella if that seemingly benign definition becomes embedded in federal law. So what we're trying to protect here is not the thing that the industry technically calls behavioral advertising. What we're trying to protect is the ability of marketers, agencies, and publishers to run display advertising, period, full stop.
I'm gonna ask you another couple quick questions, including what you're up to in 2010. And then we're going to bring on Dina Kaplan of Blip TV and Steve Rosenbaum of Magnify. And please keep sending your questions. We're also going to, while we bring them in, show a clip. We've got a couple of clips lined up. Since it's IAB on the road, I'm actually not sure exactly which one is going to work. We've gone to a couple of trade shows and interviewed a whole bunch of people. We have one user question for Randall that you said you don't really have. The question was from Steve. How will brands handle user-generated video in 2010? Which you said you're not sure, but let me ask.
Well, it's a broader question than that. I think the answer is more ways than you can count.
And the way I would ask it is, how would you recommend that brands or advertisers approach the whole idea of users doing stuff that they can't control?
Well,
do we all need to relax? Did they all need to relax?
I mean, AJ Lafley was talking about this 3 or 4 years ago. So it's basically saying that brands have to get used to operating in environments where they don't have control, because the value that comes from participating in a community far transcends the risks that might occur from somebody benignly or intentionally misusing your brand. It's kind of like, get over it. It's going to happen. There's too much opportunity here, so leap into it and start experimenting and developing best practices. So I think that's a kind of a general.
Do you have 1 or 2 best practices?
I mean, best practice. Are there 1 or 2 best practices? We're still working on them actually at the IAB social media committee. So I think that's really the serious answer is we're trying to develop, through a committee of more than 100 companies, some sense of what those best practices or emerging practices are. But there's a lot of common sense here, right? Common sense says, be involved with agencies and media companies that are very good and experienced brand stewards. So if you're going with a company like whether it's MTV Online or Blip TV, where you've got serious, educated professionals running it, you're going to be assured of reasonable brand stewardship, even in, you know, an open community environment. If you're placing your ads on, you know, Joe's TV, and you've never heard of Joe's TV, and you don't know the people who are running Joe's TV, and you don't know the executives, well, you know, you're probably opening yourself up to a little bit more risk. I mean, but that's just common sense.
So what else you got coming up in 2010? You're working on this social media standards?
Well, we're working, I mean, there are a bunch of things. I mean, our biggest initiatives in 2010 at IAB.
And I'd love it if you said something that you haven't said anywhere else before.
Bring news. Well, our biggest initiative, we're calling the 2010 strategy the Shifting Share campaign. So we're in the process of writing to the top 200 brand advertisers in the United States and offering to bring to them the kind of classic IAB boot camp on interactive advertising and marketing. We've called it the IAB boot camp for senior marketers. And these boot camps are taught by our member companies. So we realized that this now has been the year when senior marketers, really at the highest level, are now looking at this medium for brand marketing purposes and poised to spend more. But in order to do that, they want to learn more. And so we're mobilizing our 400 member companies to be that teaching and development force for marketers. One of our other biggest initiatives this year has been an ongoing challenge we call Making Measurement Make Sense. And we're really trying to double down on getting an industry-wide consensus around appropriate measurement standards against specific objectives. The IAB Bain Building Brands Online study really helped lead us in this direction. So as all IAB members know, we've been heavily involved in measurement. It's a long-term project. I mean, it is very difficult to organize across industries and companies, especially when there's so much confusion and cacophony in the marketplace.
Just like ask Nielsen.
There will be,
or ComScore.
There will be,
or Quantcast.
There will be quite a lot of components of this. Another major initiative we call Reimagining Interactive Advertising. So we just did a slight revision of the format standards, the universal ad package, but we're doing a lot more around brand advertising and marketing research.
Did you say you're revising the?
We did a slight revision just recently.
Yeah.
But one of the things we will do explicitly in 2010.
So again, for some of the folks watching are not advertising people, so the universal ad package is basically the one that set the basic standards for web advertising.
Right.
You know, these are the sizes, the leaderboard, the large banner at the top of a page, the box in the middle of a page.
One of the things that we've done by kind of going full frontal on the importance of recognizing this distinction between direct response advertising and brand advertising, we've basically come out and said, this medium physically and visually has not been hospitable to brand advertising. We've cluttered our pages, we've had small, tiny, inhospitable ad formats, and so what we really need to do is kind of get out there and start testing and proposing ad formats that are more brand hospitable, and that will be a process that's already begun and take place this year.
So your standards might include only so many ads per page or something like that?
Could be. I don't want to go there because I don't know. I mean, these things are done. We have a very, very formal process that's worked out very well for 14 years over how to do these things, to make sure, because the point is not to come out with a standard. The point is to get it implemented and become a standard.
Right.
You don't stop with the white paper or the document. You stop when you get wide implementation. So that's what we're really about. A couple other things of note. Obviously, the privacy.
We just have like a minute left.
Privacy and self-regulation is among our highest priorities. Working with our cross-industry partners. And another one, we've really done a lot of supply chain standardization, and we're on the verge of taking hundreds of millions of dollars of cost out of our industry and out of the agency business through things like standardizing of RFPs, insertion orders and invoices, and we're in beta now with an impressions discrepancies early warning system that will roll out to the entire industry sometime, we hope, during the first half of 2010. That'll have an enormous impact on cost savings across the supply chain.
So just last 30 seconds, when you say the supply chain and standardization I mean, this obviously, this could be a topic for an hour-long discussion in and of itself, but explain to me very briefly what you mean by the interactive advertising supply chain. And
well, the simplest way to think about it is we work on two things here. We work on promoting growth, and we work on cutting costs for the industry. Mm-hmm. All the cost lies in the supply chain, and that is quite simply how an ad gets from point A to point B, gets measured, and then gets optimized. And that's all the sausage making of the industry. Right. What are the standard format sizes? What is the infrastructure of delivery from third-party, through third-party ad servers to publishers look like? You know, what does a standard insertion order look like? Can it be baked into an e-business fulfillment system so that human entry errors don't gum up the works? Okay. Those are the kinds of things that IAB does that really just, as I said, they take hundreds of millions of dollars out of the business.
Warning system?
Well, it's a discrepancies early warning system. One of the biggest issues in the industry historically has been discrepancies between what publisher servers report around ad delivery, impressions delivery, and what the third party, like DoubleClick or Atlas, reports. And research that IAB has done with the Media Ratings Council really has shown that overwhelmingly that issue, that discrepancy problem, has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with human error in order entry. It's the biggest problem we have in discrepancies. And the reason it becomes and remains a problem is you don't find out about these discrepancies until the campaign has concluded and the bill comes in 30 or 60 days later. We now have in beta, and we're working with all the major third-party serving companies, working with the major agencies and a lot of big publishers on this. We have in beta an early warning system that will show you on the first day a campaign launches whether there are discrepancies. And that allows you to go, halt, you know, stop the presses. Right. Why is this going on? Where did we make the mistake?
And there are real dollars at stake here because if a publisher shows 20% more advertising served than DoubleClick.
Millions and millions of dollars. And if you can intervene on day one or day two and find the issue and resolve it, you don't have these terrible cost problems. You haven't wasted premium inventory. You can get ahead. So that's the sausage making part of what we do, but it's a very, very important part.
All right. Well, the sausage making is not pretty, but necessary. The other stuff might be pretty. Thank you so much. Yes. This has been really informative.
And
I'll
just leave you with this. I like sausage.
Well, so do I. We're hoping not to show you too much sausage and make it a little bit pretty. We're going to show a bit of a clip from show interview that we've done. Thank you to Randall Rothenberg, President and CEO of the IAB. We're going to bring in Dina Kaplan of Blip TV and Steve Rosenbaum of Magnify.net. And we'll be back in a moment. This is Naked Media. I'm Dorian Bencoil.